So, good afternoon everyone, I'm Claudia Caporizzo. As Dr. Antilei already said, I'm a young researcher from the Partenopeo University of Naples, and today I'm here to present you the results related to our work aimed at reconstructing the coastal landscape of Campi Flegrei and its surroundings between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD, underlying the importance of the fish tank in such a matter. Campi Flegrei is a complex volcanic system setting within a polycaldera structure formed after the two major eruptions of the area happened between 39 and 15 kiloyears before present. These two major eruptions were followed by 3 periods of volcanic activity, which led to the formation of numerous craters within the caldera. They are still visible today. The last eruption of Campi Flegrei complex happened in the year 1538, leading to the formation of Monte Nuovo in less than 8 days. Campi Flegrei is worldwide known for being affected by sudden volcanotectonic ground movements called bradysismic crises that led to strong modification of the coastal landscape, particularly during the Holocene. And the worldwide symbol of this peculiar phenomenon is for sure the Roman market at Pozzuoli, also called Macellum, with its marble column showing traces of lithofaga holes. For its importance, the Macellum was also chosen by Charles Lyell for the cover of his book Principle of Geology in 1872. The last bradysismic crisis took place between the years 1983 and 1985, producing an overall uplift of almost 2 meters, which effects are still visible in the area of the Pozzuoli Harbour. The study area was surveyed through a multi-technique approach made of both direct and indirect surveys, and where possible, these surveys were coupled with an extensive analysis of historical and bibliographic sources and also stratigraphic data. The major part, the most important part of our methodology was constituted by direct underwater archaeological surveys performed along the numerous archaeological sites present in our area. And in particular, we interpreted the structural features belong to these archaeological remains that were directly linked to the former sea level as high-precision sea level markers. We recognized in our area essentially three types of sea level marker: the coastal defense structures, in particular the pile, the coastal buildings with mainly characterized by floor remains, and of course the fish tanks. As we know, the fish tanks are the most precise archaeological sea level marker, and in the case of the fish tank, in the case of all the sea level index points, we defined a value for the functional clearance that was the minimum elevation of the marker above the former medium sea level, and also a specific value of indicative range, the elevation range over which the marker formed compared to a tidal level. In the case of the fish tank, we went for a functional clearance of 20 centimeters. As we know, it's always hard to decide for a general value of functional clearance for this kind of structure. So our functional clearance was based on local observation. In particular, we always find the vertical post of the sluice gate, the post where the sliding roofs were carved, with a maximum height of 1 meter. In view of this, considering that the tidal range in the Gulf of Naples is 40 centimeters, a functional clearance higher than 20 centimeters, which would not have allowed the water income within the tank and also the water exchange with the open sea. Our study area was also surveyed through indirect surveys, and in particular the majority of the coastal sector was surveyed through traditional morphoacoustic surveys, implying multi-beam and side-scan sonar system, but also for critical areas due to the presence of shallow water condition and also the presence of semi-submerged archaeological structures. The indirect surveys were carried out using a prototype of an unmanned surface vessel named Argo that was engineered in the laboratories of Partenopea University, which allows the simultaneous use of different sensors. A suite of glacio-hydroisostatic adjustment models was produced by using the sea level equation solver Selene, coupled with 3 different airship chronologies. And the sea level equation has been solved for a total of 54 models, considering 3 different values of lithosphere thickness and 3 ranges of value for the mantle viscosity. Then, for the vertical displacement, the volcanotectonic vertical displacement related to each sea level marker, was calculated in a Python environment by using a statistical approach, implying Monte Carlo simulation. Moving to the results, I'm first going to show you what we obtained from some of our direct geoarchaeological surveys along the submerged sector of Campi Flegrei, and I would like to start from Portus Iulius. Portus Iulius is a really famous site that lived at least 2 different periods of constructive phases. The first one started in the year 37 before Christ, when the harbor was actually constructed. At the beginning it was a military harbor, and during this first phase the main channel and the pile located at the entrance of the channel were constructed. The second phase started around the year 12 before Christ, when the harbor became a commercial harbor, and the structure was equipped with the construction of numerous warehouses and the fish tank. In this case, we were able to detect a relative sea level position for the second half of the 1st century before Christ of -3.1 meters. Okay, moving to a second sector, second and third, Pisoni Villa and the Claudius Nymphaeum. The Pisoni Villa is a really huge archaeological complex dated back to the end of the 1st century AD and the beginning of the 2nd century AD. Here we detected a part of the sluice gate that was still in situ, defining a relative sea level change, for a relative sea level position for the end of the 1st century BC of almost 7 meters below the medium sea level. In the case of the Claudius Nymphaeum, dated at the half of the 1st century AD, we measured the submersion of perfectly preserved marble floor that were interpreted as terrestrial limiting point, helping in define an upper limit for the former relative sea level position. Also, Protiro Villa is another really beautiful archaeological site, also dated between at the end of the first century AD. In this case, the direct survey concerned the measurements of the submersion measurements of 2 beautiful mosaic floors that you can see in the picture that were interpreted as a terrestrial limiting point. And in this site, we carried out also a side-scan sonar survey that helped us to obtain a morphometric characterization of the area. Moving southern at Baia Castle, the remains of a fish tank related to the Caesar properties in the area were the focus of another direct surveys. Here, the direct survey concerned the sluice gate, the best preserved sluice gate, helping us assessing a relative sea level position for the half of the 1st century before Christ at about minus 4 meters below the medium sea level. Also in this side with the unmanned surface vessel Largo, we performed a side-scan sonar survey that helped us to map the disposition of all the archaeological structures. Moving southward, along the Miseno coastal sector, other 2 archaeological sites were investigated. The first one located at Bacoli, and is a fish tank that belonged to the Roman lawyer Hortensio Ortalo, and dated back to, both are dated to the half of the 1st century before Christ. The second one is a fish tank that was connected to a maritime villa constructed before the year 12 before Christ. That is the year when the military harbor was moved from Portus Iulius to the Miseno Bay. In this case, we assessed a relative sea level position for the half of the 1st century before Christ of about minus 4 meters. The last example that I will show you is the Lucullus Villa. It's located along the western side of Miseno Cape, and dated back to the half of the 1st century before Christ. In this case, the direct survey concerned a series of fish tanks and also their connection channels. And in this case, we measured the lower crepido level. Another results obtained by overlaying our data from the direct and indirect surveys was the reconstruction of the Roman Paleo landscape of the area between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. And I'm going to show you our reconstruction really quick because we don't have a lot of time. Sector 1 is, corresponds to the western margin of the Campi Flegrei caldera, and here, in the neighborhood of the Fusaro Lake, the ancient Acherusia Palus, the coastline was characterized by the presence of a sandy coastal spit that was laid between the coastal lagoon and the open sea, while moving southern at Monte di Procida, the coastline was characterized mainly by high coast and the presence of the Miliscola beach. In this area, the comparison between the GIA models and the relative sea level gave us the chance to assess that the area during the last 2 years was affected by an overall prevailing subsidence of about 2 meters, which was overcome by the local coastal progradation within the bay, the local sectors, and that produced the parallel coastal retreat along the Tufaccio cliff. Sector 2 is, I think, the most interesting one. As you can see, the coastline was strongly anthropized and characterized by the presence of an almost uninterrupted sequence of maritime villas, coastal buildings, and also infrastructures. Of course, from the paleolandscape scenario, the geomorphological complexity of the area stands out with the presence of La Starza Marine Terrace. The witness of a volcanotectonic uplift happened 5 kiloyears before presence, or the presence of Averno Lake crater, which formed during the last volcanic activity of Campi Flegrei, the 3rd period, about 4.1 kiloyears before present. Moving southward along the Miseno coastal sector, is interesting to notice that all the archaeological structures were constructed on an already emerged paleoshore platforms, testifying a volcanotectonic uplift happened already before the Roman time. In this sector, the comparison between the GIA models and the relative sea level underlined how in this area the relative sea level change did not follow a continuous behavior in our considered time span, but was characterized by sudden relative sea level fall and relative sea level rise of volcanotectonic region. Moving to the 3rd sector, that represents the eastern part of the Campi Flegrei caldera and focusing on the Posillipo Hill, the identified archaeological structures that in this case were marine archaeological structures were constructed on a submerged paleoshore platform, testifying on one hand the high urbanization of this peripheral area, but also testifying a volcanotectonic subsidence in this case happened already started before the Roman time. Moving northward at Chiaia Bay, the area was characterized by the presence of a sandy beach, bordered to the east by Pizzo Falcone promontory in Megaris Island, and by the presence of a pre-Roman paleoshore platform at its back, probably related to the maximum mollusk in marine ingression. In this case, the comparison between the GIA models and our data gave us the opportunity to detect in the considered time span, just 2 centuries, a bradyseismic crisis, actually a volcanotectonic subsidence that produced a relative sea level rise of almost 1.5 meters. Moving to the conclusion, this is a map representing the overall local coastal trends, and we were able to observe that all the low-coast sectors were affected by a prevailing coastal progradation, which overcome the overall volcanotectonic subsidence affecting the whole area, while all the high-coast sectors were affected by a prevailing coastal retreat, also testified by the numerous paleoshore platforms that we found at the foot of the sea cliffs. In terms of vertical ground movements, we observed that the 2 peripheral sectors, Sector 1 and Sector 3, were affected during the last 2 kiloyears by a prevailing subsidence ranging between -1, 1.5 and -2 meters, while the situation in the central sector, the central part of the caldera, was quite different, and the area was characterized by different bradyseismic crises. One happened about 1.8 kiloyears before present, which bring the relative sea level, and was a volcanotectonic subsidence causing a relative sea level rise, bringing the relative sea level from about -7 to +7 meters above the medium sea level, followed after 1 kiloyear by another volcanotectonic movement, another bradyseismic crisis characterized by a volcanotectonic uplift, which bring the relative sea level to its current position. I would like to conclude saying that the high precision of our measurements related to the archaeological sea level markers, and in particular the fish tanks, among these millennial trends, gave us the opportunity also to detect relative sea level changes on a decadal scale. Thank you.